This weekend's sermon is entitled Standing on Holy Ground. And I want us to hear the story of Moses and the burning bush in the midst of more chaos, more despair, more fatigue, and more protests after another police shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So what can we learn about standing on holy ground in the midst of another round of angry protests, dueling political conventions, and our professional athletes in several different sports going on strike, refusing to entertain us? It doesn't feel like we're standing on holy ground, or it doesn't to me. It feels like we're being knocked about by hurricane-force winds. Oh yeah, that too this week. There are hurricanes. Now, many of you have been doing work, praying, reading, reflecting, trying to foster richer connections between your faith in Jesus Christ and the urgent social issues of our day. More to the point, you've been asking what your Christian faith has to do with systemic racism, with Black Lives Matter, with protests, with calls for reform in our law enforcement practices. And you're probably like me, you've been trying to stay on top of the news as best you can, but there's so much news, and it's so overwhelming and so heartbreaking that we're all getting a little weary. We're tired of arguing. We're tired of having to watch the violence. We're tired of a news cycle replete with all the partisan shouting. And we're tempted to shut down, to pull ourselves like little turtles back into the safety of our shells. So what if our little story about Moses and the burning bush actually has what we need to recenter ourselves during this turbulent time? What if this story ushers us into a space of genuinely good news for ourselves, for our Black and brown neighbors and friends, for our wider community too? What if this story can reconnect us to an electric spark, an aliveness, a courageous curiosity that can become our new posture, our new attitude, our new way of being in the world? What if a time of chaos, unrest, sadness, and anger could actually be seen as a holy time, a time when God meets us in ways that enable our flourishing and our growth? When God gets Moses' attention through the burning bush, God tells Moses to remove his sandals, for he is standing on holy ground. So as we reflect together on this story, let's be careful. Like Moses, we too are in danger of nonchalantly ambling through our lives, oblivious to the fact that we are standing on holy ground. So let's do our best to welcome this familiar story of Moses and the burning bush into our imaginations so that God's Spirit can help us see more, can help us begin to rearrange our values and renew our faith. If we can stay curious, this story can help us get better at practicing the awe, the wonder, and the curiosity of a life open to the fresh and exciting movement of God's energy in our midst. In our story, Moses finds himself standing on holy ground. Now, Midian, the place where Moses was living, was not a particularly important place, and Moses' work was not important. It was utterly ordinary. He was tending sheep. Not much about Moses' life seemed holy. He was a hothead who had broken up a fight between an Egyptian and an Israelite and had killed the Egyptian during that fight. That's why Moses had to flee the country of Egypt. And so he's a long way from home, a long way from anywhere that looks important. But that's where Moses meets God. I want you to notice how Moses moves through this story. And I want you to ask yourself if these kinds of habits, these practices, are part of your life. Okay? So first of all, Moses pays attention. He actually sees the bush. He notices the burning bush. He's awake enough to notice his surroundings. That's the first thing. The next thing is that Moses exhibits curiosity. He says, I wonder why that bush is burning and yet it's not burning up. It's not being consumed. What's going on here? Expresses curiosity about the world around him. Next, he makes himself available to the entirety of the experience in this encounter with God. God ends up giving Moses instructions that he's to play a pivotal role in the freeing of God's people from Egypt. And Moses says, "Here am I. I'll go. I'll be part of the work you've called me to be a part of." Next, he models humility. He has questions about whether he has the capacities, the strengths, the gifts to do the work that God's called him to do. Who am I? Moses asked. In other words, he recognizes that he will not be able to fulfill this calling unless he relies on God's strength. And finally, Moses is flexible enough to welcome an unexpected, strange experience. God asks Moses to remove his sandals so that he will not miss the oddness and the significance of this event. He is standing on holy ground. Now, I think the story invites us into these same kinds of practices. If we can learn to live this way, we will be more likely to discover the aliveness, the spark that reconnects us to a larger sense of purpose and to joy, even in challenging, turbulent times. Actually, this story does not invite us into any sort of preoccupation with special holy places. God didn't ask Moses to stay there by the burning bush. God asked Moses to become a leader in a larger project that aimed at freeing God's people from oppression. That's what happens in holy places. God meets you and sweeps you into something much larger than yourself. Holy places don't freeze you in one spot. Transformative, life-giving experiences, they don't fix you in place, they don't trap you, they don't paralyze you. During our lives, there will be times when we are met by an energizing force and then sent forward from that place to share in holy work as God's friends and partners. I hope it doesn't surprise you that holiness is paired in this story with the work of freeing people in pain from oppression and injustice. Now translate that part of the story into our own lives. And what this story means is that the best places for us to meet God are any places where people gather their bodies, their voices, and their energy to demand recognition for the beauty and the dignity of black lives and black bodies. So the best place to meet God right now isn't in the calm and quiet of a church building like this. Rather, we meet God out in public spaces, in the streets where black, brown, and white people are gathering together against the dehumanizing, brutal forces of racism. We meet God in the hesitant, faltering conversations we're having in which we try our best to stand up for good news in the face of bigotry, hatred, and racism. Sometimes that gets voiced by people we don't like. Sometimes it's by our racist uncle. Sometimes it's by our best friends. These are, of course, often angry and uncomfortable spaces, but they are the places where God will meet you. And they are the places where you can come to life. And remember, the spirit of protest, the spirit of resistance is as important as the practice of protest itself. I know that we live in a smaller rural place and things are a little bit different here. We actually get to know and respect our local law enforcement officials. Case in point, our sheriff, Bill Martin, led worship this weekend. Another case in point, when we had a Black Lives Matter protest, our police chief, Travis Shelton, and another officer, Jason Pickard, were there with us. They brought water and asked what else we needed. That's a wonderful thing about this particular community, but it's not true everywhere. We can welcome and share the anger of our fellow citizens across the country who gather with courage and with resolution, who risk their safety and sacrifice their time to demand a better future for all of us together. For far too long, friends, American Christians have identified politeness, conflict avoidance, and obedience to law enforcement as the essential Christian virtues. God will not meet us there in our white niceness. God will meet us in our agitation, in our unrest, in our dreams for a world where black women and black men and black children don't fear for their lives every time they leave their homes. The Bible is filled with holy places, places full of wonder and mystery. Holy places and holy things are usually strange, odd, profound, awe-inspiring. When you're in a holy place or dealing with holy things, your life takes on new light and depth. You experience a connectedness to all of reality and even to the creative energy that buzzes within that reality. And for most of history, there have been holy places, enchanted forests, magic wells, shrines of devotion, dreamlands accessed through secret doors. The Celtic term for a holy place is a thin place. Travel writer Eric Weiner describes thin places as, quote, locales where the distance between heaven and earth collapses and we're able to catch glimpses of the divine or the transcendent, or as I like to think of it, the infinite whatever. I like that. He continues, travel to thin places does not necessarily lead to anything as grandiose as a spiritual breakthrough, whatever that means, but it does disorient. It confuses. We lose our bearings and find new ones, or maybe not. Either way, we're jolted out of old ways of seeing the world, end quote. So let me ask you, where are your thin places? Where are the places that feel sacred and special for you? Where are the places that shift your perspective and help you feel connected or reconnected to everything else? Where do you go when you need to be jolted out of a framework or an attitude that's too rigid, too paralyzing? Where are the places that return you to the largest possibilities for your own life? Now, just a few minutes ago, I downplayed the safety of church life. But to be honest, church sanctuaries can be holy places for me. It usually doesn't feel very holy when we're in here during worship because that's when I'm working. It feels holy when I'm quiet and when I'm by myself. Our sanctuary often restores me to sanity when I feel unmoored and confused by all that's swirling around in me. I love being in the all-white, sparse, and simple sanctuary at Yale Divinity School, where I spent 9 years of my life. I treasure the square, cool, cavernous gray sanctuary at the Church of St. Matthew and St. Timothy on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where our congregation gathered for worship. But many of you probably get reconnected to your life in places that aren't particularly churchy or religious. Maybe it's the mountains for you, their looming mass, their inaccessible peaks, their jagged, gorgeous surfaces. Maybe it's water, the calm of a relaxing lake, tucked away pond where you fish, or the beach, that boundary line between land and the ocean's vast expanse. Maybe it's the places where you work that connects you to your aliveness. Doing what you do well, using your hands, moving your body, riding a tractor, making food, solving problems in your office space, working in the yard. I've talked to some people who have a particular room in their home that can recenter them and reconnect them. Maybe it's the sun porch or a reading chair or a back deck. Sharing a meal around a table with friends can often bring us back to life. Some people even find that being on the road, even traveling in a car, road trip, can feel holy and renewing. Now, some of you might be listening to me thinking, Jared, I don't have special enchanted experiences like that. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, let me push back. Let me challenge you just a little bit. Part of what we confess as Presbyterians and as Christians is that God's Spirit is always everywhere, calling us from deadness to aliveness, from numbness to new energy, from isolation to solidarity and friendship. So if we're never experiencing that jolt, that jarring spark of energy, it might be because, like Moses, we haven't yet taken off our shoes. We haven't learned to hit pause, to slow down, to wait, and to watch for God's life-giving energy to meet us where we are. The poet Wendell Berry writes this: "There are no unsacred places, there are only sacred places and desecrated places." So back up with me for just a moment. If you're having trouble imagining yourself standing on holy ground, try forgetting the word holy for a minute. The terms holy and holiness, they can have a kind of musty smell for us, and they might be too distracting as we're reflecting on this. So let's ask ourselves instead, are there places that are important to us? Are there parts of the day or parts of the week that are more important to us than other parts? Now, step back even a little further. Look back over the course of your life as a whole. Are there parts of your memory, parts of your experience that are more important than others? And finally, and this is really important, are there parts of your body that you value more than other parts? Wendell Berry read the story of Moses and the burning bush to mean that all places are holy places, that there isn't any part of our experience that can't become a site of sacredness, of specialness, of holiness. There aren't any times, any experiences, any memories, any bodily sensations that are unholy. Everything is aflame and alive if only we would take off our shoes and realize where we're standing. You and I make places holy by being there. Any place can be holy. Any place can be full of God. Any place where we struggle for our own freedom and for the freedom of other people is a holy place. Wherever God's Spirit is at work is a holy place. The Holy Spirit blows like a mysterious wind wherever it wills, here and there, disobedient to any rules and boundaries that we might manufacture. So perhaps the problem is that we have not yet come to see ourselves and our immediate surroundings and our daily lives as holy places. We have not yet come to see our bodies and our desires as holy things. We have not yet realized that we are ourselves the burning bush, aflame with aliveness, sustained by the living mystery of the one who takes the mysterious name, I am who I am. Amen.